Conrad.
I don't know. I mean, they're gonna call me. They're gonna call me something else. What's that?
Check one, check,
No,
check, check.
that's fine.
Check, check. I think I'm here.
That's so. Good.
No, we have minutes.
I know. It happened to me. I go through the month. Not desperate.
Good evening. Welcome to the Walnut Creek Design Review Commission meeting Wednesday, February 1st, 2023 at our new time, 6 p.m. We have reopened to the public and commissioners are meeting here in council chambers, and we like when the public comes and attends. As a courtesy and technology permitting, members of the public may continue to provide live remote oral comment via the city's Zoom video conferencing platform. However, the city cannot guarantee that the public's access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and technical difficulties may occur from time to time. Members of the public desiring to provide comments as part of the meeting are encouraged to either submit written comments at least 2 hours prior to the meeting or to attend the meeting in person. Mr. Secretary, would you take a roll call, please?
I can, thank you. We have Commissioner Valia,
Here.
Commissioner Case,
Here.
Chair Krelling.
Here.
We have a quorum of 3. Commissioners Newsom and Vice Chair Killian have phoned in their absentees for today.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar. Do we have any items on consent or any we wish to move to consent?
We do. We have a staff recommendation to move item Y19068, a 2-year extension for 1501 North California mixed use, and for Y16112, the Foundry, to consent for a 2-year extension.
Do the commissioners want to move to consent, the 2 extensions?
Yes.
I have no problem.
Okay, all 3 of us are good with moving that to consent.
Okay, so we'd need a motion on the consent calendar as a whole.
I make a motion to move those items to consent and then approve the consent calendar.
I second it.
Our mics aren't telling us
Yeah.
they're on, but maybe they are.
Yep, same issue down here.
Okay.
We have gremlins in the system. All right, Mr. Secretary, we have a motion and a second. Can we take a vote?
We can. Chair Krelling.
Yes.
Commissioner Valia.
Yes.
Commissioner Case.
Yes.
3, motion carries.
May I ask one question, a general question of the Secretary related to extensions in general?
You may.
I noticed that when we have extensions, we send out essentially a full package of all the prior information. And I know that probably takes staff time, and plus we're using the resources. Do we need the full packages? Is there?
Well, did you receive a paper a packet in the mail along with everything else?
Yes.
Well, yes, because those items are mentioned, or they're attachments in the staff report. You've got you're adopting a resolution. The resolution refers to those plans as Exhibit A, so yes.
Okay, thank you.
They could be electronic, though.
Okay, maybe just something for us to consider in the future. All right, thank you. All right. Moving from consent calendar to public communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comment on items not on tonight's agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may respond briefly to statements made or questions posed, request clarification, or refer the item to staff. Do we have anybody in chambers who wishes to address the Commission for something not on tonight's agenda? There being none, Mr. Secretary, do we have anybody on Zoom?
Seeing none?
All right, we will close the general public communications. And public hearings, we don't have any as we move the 2 items to consent. So we are now moving to commission considerations. And Mr. Secretary, I see we have an item, input for City Council priority setting.
We do. Community Development Director Erica Vandenbrand would like to make a short presentation to spur a conversation regarding council priority setting and how this commission would like to influence that.
Great, thank you.
This is probably going to be one of the shortest presentations you've ever received. I'm Erica Vandenbrand, Community Development Director here at Walnut Creek, and the council is seeking each commission's input on what your thoughts are about the upcoming biennium's council priorities, for budget and for things to be worked on. And with that, in your packet, you have the current through the end of fiscal year 2023 priorities, which include diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is number 1. Number 2, economic development and COVID recovery. 3, environmental sustainability and climate action. 4, infrastructure and facilities, and then 5, social wellness and public safety. And that really is the framing, even though this is a formal setting, really what the input that we're soliciting is for the commission to provide your thoughts about what council priorities might be, or what there are areas that you feel that could be enhanced in the coming biennium. And with that, I will listen very carefully and serve as your scribe.
Thank you. And Mr. Secretary, do we have a traditional format for doing this discussion?
Well, I think it can be a roundtable. Voice your concerns, opinions, wishes, desires, and then we can reach consensus once that's achieved.
Okay, great. How about if we start with Commissioner Case?
I have a question, actually. I know that there is a pipeline replacement happening in our downtown, and I'm guessing it was related that some of the outdoor dining was removed with that. But in line with number 2, which was the economic development and COVID response, what is the plan for that? Is there a continued opportunity for some of the parking to be given back to like the pedestrian experience? You guys know how I feel about that. Or is there a plan for that? Or is that me asking this question saying that I have interest in number 2, the economic development and COVID response?
So there, try this again. So there is indeed a time frame around this, and the council just adopted. There we go again. Council just adopted a policy and implementation, ordinance, et cetera, most recently. And so the idea is that as this rolls out as a program, there will be opportunities to reintroduce outdoor dining in a more systematic way.
Yeah.
So that's the yes part about it.
Okay.
The other part, if you have any additional thoughts about economic development, pedestrian orientation, et cetera, now would be a good time to share what that might be within the context.
Yeah.
I might also add, as a side, on Locust, one of the reasons everything's been removed is for a pipeline replacement.
Yeah. I figured they were related because I saw that. And I see some other places it's still there. And I know that there had been discussion about setting like some standards for if you're going to do it. And do we control what that containment environment looks like and feels like? And I think that's reasonable and makes sense. I really like beginning to shift downtown experience away from being as car dominant. And I think that we have a lot of parking resources throughout town. I think that the signage directing people to them is reasonable. And I think part of what makes downtown Walnut Creek so charming is the fact that it feels like it's not oriented so much to the car. So I think continuing to put emphasis on exploring creative ways to shift that dynamic from parking spots to instead usable spaces for people not in their car is important. And I am participating in a lot of studies about that same dynamic in other jurisdictions. So I know it's important, and we're beginning to see more evidence that it does create economic vitality, because you can't as easily spend your money when you're in your car, although there are ways, I realize that. But it's also, so it's almost like you have to be a pedestrian to become a customer. And sometimes we forget that because there's a convenience factor. So that's something that I feel I would like to continue thinking about. I'm trying to think if there's something else along those lines. I would be curious to see if there's still a conversation about ever putting cars on the Broadway area again. I don't know if that's aligned with this. I'm just curious. I like not having them. I wonder how that is feeling for those retailers and stuff. So I think that's interesting. That's the only one I'd wrapped my head around the most in this moment. So I'm gonna kick to somebody else.
Can I
Yeah.
clarify? You mean the on-street parking on Broadway?
No, I'm sorry. This in Broadway Plaza, where we have the barriers down by Nordstrom at one end, and I know eventually that, because we saw it here, that Lifetime Fitness or something is gonna try to be an anchor at the other end. So that's interesting. And so does that create, just a pedestrian experience, or is it temporary? Because a lot of the studies we're looking at in other places are, do we permanently keep the car off, or is it like on weekends there's no cars, and so it's removable bollards and a wooner or something, so this is kind of my neck of the woods, which is why I have more opinions about it. It probably links into infrastructure, because I think it is how we're parking and how we're moving and how we're allocating space. I think the movements we've been seeing in projects that are giving public pedestrian space, like we see downtown, are good. They seem a little fragmented, but I'd rather it be some than none. I love the art projects we're seeing downtown. I think those are really fun. I think those are almost like easy tools to engage the community and have some of that local stewardship, which is really neat. I love the events and stuff that we have, the little like craft fairs, and I like outdoor live music, so the more we can have that available. This is totally like my personal opinion wish list. I love it. Yeah, that's what I've got in this moment. I'd love others to jump in and spawn more ideas in me.
Thank you, Commissioner Valia.
Can you hear me? Hello? That's better, okay. So I can't see the light here, Chip, so. I think that's amazing. My question is, I have a question instead of a lot of good ideas right now. On the infrastructure front, do we have priorities on that? I mean, do we know what parks we are talking about and what athletic fields we're talking about, what buildings we're talking about that are in need of upgrade or update or repair, or because I would love to have a list of what's
So-
being.
Again, there is, our Parks, Our Future as a project that, is under discussion with council. And certainly as part of the budget development, there's our capital improvement program list. And so those are all part and parcel of all that. And we can easily, point you to those areas.
Our parks are going to council, like next week or something. I put it on
So
my
for
calendar.
discussion, correct. So in short, yes, we have a list,
You have
but-
a list.
but have I memorized it off the top of my head and to be able to tell you? Pop quiz?
Can we-
No.
I know.
As well as the CIP.
Tuesday at 6, yeah, you're guiding me to this. I mean, you just, yeah, I can check it out.
Okay.
I would love to see that. I became really interested in parks, athletic fields. I got grandchildren, and they use this a lot, so.
Okay, anything else, Commissioner Valia, for now? We'll come back.
Not for now, thank you.
Okay, thanks. As I thought about priorities, I would like to see the council work on, and they're somewhat covered in some of these priorities already. Under the social wellness and public safety, 'cause one of my items was homelessness, but I think it's covered there. Support new and better responses to homelessness. I think I'd love to see the council focus on when a resident or a business has issues with homeless causing any issues on ingress or egress, or, deciding to set up camp, by somebody's house or in front of a business. I'd like the city to have a more proactive action plan as opposed to what they have today. So it's just that would be a focus area of mine for homelessness. And I know it's not under the council's control, but I would love to see, my understanding now is Trinity is not a 24/7 shelter. I always thought it was. And having a 24/7 shelter changes the actions a municipality can take on what they do with homeless issues. So at least to consider or support a 24/7 shelter. Also sort of in the same area under public safety, crime prevention. I'd like to see a continued focus on crime prevention. And also I would like to see the city, and they may be doing this and it's just not visible to us, more proactively engaged the district attorney's office to ensure that people who commit crimes in our city, especially gun crimes, are not on the street the next day. There should be consequences, and if criminals realize, hey, at least on Walnut Creek, I'll end up with a consequence, they might go somewhere else, hopefully. I'm going to key off a little bit of Commissioner Case's comment. The Broadway Plaza shops, every time I walk through there now where there's no cars, I keep thinking of European Christmas markets and something like that maybe year round. Is there a reimagination of that space that is fully pedestrian and it's more than just an empty street right now? Permitting, which I think falls under maybe economic development. So my understanding is that the city's looking at the permitting processes, streamlining, making things easier. I believe we have some consultants or firms that are helping us. I think it would be valuable to have commission representation, at least from design and planning, working with the city and consultants if we're using them, because we're all in the trenches, whether we're doing our issues about tree removal permits or looking at fences or designs, and obviously the Planning Commission is looking at a lot of conditional use permits. We're in the trenches with the applicants trying to make decisions about what they can do and not do. And I think we probably have a lot of input to give to the city while they're forming the processes, rather than our essentially hearing about the processes when they're finalized. Because I suspect that might be how it'll work. And then finally, my last one, I promise, for now, at least this commission's been dealing a lot with all the state laws about housing density. And I know on our legislative slate, I know City Council has not been for a lot of these changes. They're out of our control. But I would like us to not take a defeatist attitude. I think there's going to be times when it'll be important to push back on the developers, and that may subsequently mean push back on the state, so that we don't end up with bad development. I think our commissions and our city management and staff could probably help make these developments better while still helping get more housing in. And right now I feel like I don't know if we're fighting hard enough for the residents of Walnut Creek. So that's another priority I'd like to see. That's it for now. Small list.
I'm really concerned with your third point, what's going to happen with our city. And I would like to see what's going to happen. I mean, I would like to have a drawing of, if these are the areas that are actually potentially could be overdeveloped, how does it look like? I mean, like one of those, I mean, like they do everywhere in the world. I mean, like it's anticipation. This is how this thing is gonna look like with the current regulations. And this is what we're going to. How can we prevent it? Or how can we control it? Or how can we model it so it's better than what we're getting? I mean, that brings more complex models like traffic and population and many other things. So I would love to see that. I mean, I would love to see like future-looking planning to what will happen if we develop this by the current state standards, what's going to happen to our city in terms of traffic again, population again, schools, and many other services. What has to come with it?
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it was your point. I love that point.
But I love
Because
how
I'm
I
really-
love how you expanded it.
Yeah. I mean, it's more. I'm looking at it from my discipline, more like this is. I mean, they anticipate. I mean, big cities, or small cities, or smart built cities, they anticipate what the trends are, and this is where the trends are taking us, and this is what's going to happen. So, what can we do? How can we intervene, or are we happy with the way it's happening? Not only building per building and day per day, and no, I mean, let's do the whole thing before it comes to fruition.
Yeah, yeah, and what I'm sort of hearing in there is our master plan is getting maybe bypassed. You know, the developers come in, they get their hands on some property, and they look at the state law, and they go, okay, this is what we're going to do. But it may have nothing to do with how the city master planned it. And so then it's changing, the shape of our city is getting changed. You know, right now we're seeing little pockets of it, but I sort of fast forward and go, what's it going to do to our city 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
That's exactly the point. What's going to happen in the
If I
future?
may, I made a note when you were speaking about, and then you kind of drove it home with the master, but we're talking about general plan.
Right,
We're talking about what's the general plan look like
right.
with if you were to implement state law in the books now, and remember, there's more coming.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, I'm really scared of what this hit is going to be. If we follow everything the state is guiding us to do, it's
Yeah.
10 years from now, I would like to see it. 20 years from now, I would like to see it. Or 10 years from now, how do we stop it? And
Yeah. I mean, if we need more housing, great. But if we can do it in a better, enhanced manner for all concerned who live and visit Walnut Creek. Right now, it's and it's not the city's fault. It's the way the laws are set up. It's very patchwork, piece by piece, and that goes against the concept of a general plan.
yes. Yes.
So even though we might be, you know, we're subject to the state laws, maybe the other concern or the priority I would have is to continue fighting the good fight as they've been doing with their legislative agenda. And then B, and they may already be doing this, I just don't know, the city council, partner up with all the other cities around here and around the state who feel they want to have more control over their cities or towns' destinies and band together and see if we can make a difference.
It reminded me hearing about that I love, excuse me, I love that we've been prioritizing the specific plans, updating the design guidelines, working on the objective design standards, updating the sign. Like, I think staying proactive in the internal systems of the city is important, and I'm speaking kind of for my own business as well. We've had like more turnover in our staff than we'd ever seen before, and I think it's you know, happening everywhere. And so I think the more that we can kind of document and classify the goals and intentions that sort of make the essence of Walnut Creek,
Right.
and it allows it to be so that if hypothetically none of us are still at the table, we're ideally perpetuating those things is really good. So I think continuing to focus on like the documents, the general plan, and things that guide the decisions is paramount. So putting time into that planning effort and thinking about how we want to grow smartly and how we adapt to what we don't know, right? I mean, we all saw such a change in behavior in how we use public space and how we gather when we were isolated. You know, it's very different. So I think it is kind of COVID response and resiliency, but it's also how does it impact how we continue to grow and adapt based on what's happening in our state or in our culture and whatever. And so I think that, I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit rose-colored glasses, but I think that kind of touches on all of these things, like, because that's policy that drives how we make decisions. And I think setting the standards for that to survive and be a guidepost as we move forward is important.
I agree. And I think we're going to be better prepared if we come up with something, if we anticipate what's happening or what's going to happen with all these external things going on, because it's not just our plans that we're doing right now. It's the state's plan. So if we're able to, I don't know, I mean, do something 10 years plan, 5 years plan, see what's going on. I mean, and then we can start working on our strategies to actually either reject or either blend into what the state wants or half and half. I don't know. I mean, but we have to foresee something. I mean, the state is very clear in what they want. We can draw that up. And that's coming from my discipline. I mean, we can draw that up. We can see what the state wants and see what's happening to our city, to our urban fabric, to our buildings, to our landscape, to our environment.
I have to throw out a really random idea. Don't hate me. I wonder if there's a long-term, safe and reasonable way to also like celebrate the creek more. I've had conversations with people about, they're like, is there a creek in Walnut Creek? And there is. And we also have like a really intimidating, somewhat scary channel that says like, if you'll swim, you'll die, you know? And I realize that there's a reason for that. I've like been told about the history and it's been unsafe, but I wonder if there's just a long-term plan, if we're like talking high-end goals, where it's like, instead of just having a trail along that channel, if could be like a way of activating it. And I'm totally thinking of Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec, where she writes this like giant book for a grant to activate a river. You know what I'm talking about? So it's kind of like that. I think it's a cool resource, and it's engaged in like our downtown and restaurants and stuff very little. And I know that there's tons of red tape on stuff like that, but I just am throwing out the idea because we're talking about the discussion. It seems like a cool opportunity if we could find a way.
No, we're throwing out ideas.
Throwing out ideas.
Yeah.
I like it.
So.
And that's a great one.
Well, and I think when it came to my attention because the water was wild, right? I mean, people saw for the first time, they're like, oh my God, like we've never seen so much water. And people, every time I was around it, there were people gathered, like taking pictures. And it's because there was this intense movement of water that we haven't seen. But it is also like, there is this resource here. And half the time it's a trickle and there's green algae in the bottom and nobody cares. But it was suddenly this like amenity in a weird kind of way when there was a bunch of water in it. So it kind of like got my wheels turning, because that's my discipline. I'm like, how do we take advantage of what's here and build upon that in a really cool, engaging, pedestrian kind of way?
And it comes very close to my discipline. I mean, they work together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my pie in the sky one. Excuse me.
Yeah, I forget, I had a conversation with somebody about the housing laws. I can't remember who it was, but an interesting position we could take as a city is, look, you've told us the number of housing units you need us to put in. As a city, we've done a great job moving in that direction. And my understanding of where some of these laws came from, some of the legislative intent, is we have some neighboring cities that said no to all development and fought everything, you know, to the death. We haven't done that in this city, and maybe as a legislative agenda supported by the council is, hey, state of California, as long as we're making the progress on the number of housing units, why don't you just leave us alone? Let us do it our way and continue what we've been doing. And we'll commit to hitting those numbers.
So I'm not here to evaluate, judge, assess, whatever, just simply to take in, information. But just as I'd done earlier and shared information about capital projects, so I guess on the 24th, council did adopt the housing element, and that's been transmitted to the state. And so now we are in the process of putting together all our implementation strategies, which is talked about before. So their council does have a commitment to achieve the goals and outcomes that are there, and to work in collaboration with everybody and to try and streamline things. So
Yeah, we've done a good job, I think. Yeah, and I'd like to see the city get a little reward from the state on that by giving us a little, a little breathing room to meet the housing numbers in a master planned sort of way that works for the city. Well, you asked for our wish list, a priority list, right? Yeah, so, this is brainstorming. So I'm throwing out crazy ideas.
ultimately, so, we're chronicling all these different ideas, but if you have your top 3 or top 5 that, would be your priorities to advocate for council, that's also important to know.
Like to weigh in on the ranking of the 5 that were provided, is that what you mean?
Or at least not so much ranking, but, here are the top 5 or the top 3, because I have about 20.
I've kind of boiled them down a little bit, if that might help.
It would. Thank you.
And I'm continuing to boil. So here's what I got so far. One is this brought comments in from, I think, everybody, which was to focus on the downtown experience, engage the pedestrian and overall downtown, right? And that has a lot to do with how we're managing cars. And then everything else will follow in, right?
Yep.
Also, not just downtown, but also do a reimagining of Broadway Plaza, kind of with the same concept, but in a different light. There's also consideration for a 24/7, increase our homeless services for it. That might include a 24/7 shelter, and that would ultimately provide more, would make private property feel safer. We've got to take a look at the city as a whole and anticipate further state law or laws from outside regions, with the state, for example. And that would be boiled down to really what I think is a general plan update to consider existing and anticipated future state law, and what would that look like on a block-to-block or an area basis.
Right.
With, as a side note, with the intention of well, I take that back, no side note. And last but not least is Celebrate the Creek.
That's a beautiful one.
And that could also be moved in, or a part of the Broadway Plaza experience, could be part of the downtown experience. Could also be part of the overall Parks and Rec experience. I'm not sure what your focus was there.
No, it is, yeah.
All those things.
All those things.
So if we liked as a
Did I miss anything?
Not for me.
Do we want to change any of those statements?
No.
I think you can take a bunch of mine and roll them up on the downtown experience in terms of crime prevention and outcomes. Captured the homelessness. I know you're working on permitting, and that probably falls under the general plan update and maybe, child processes to that.
Well, I
So-
mean, we could add another one, which would be streamline processes. Streamline specifically city processes.
Right, yeah, you're right, because I did like that we were focusing efforts on city systems and making sure that continues, because I think it's being done. I just want to make sure it continues to be done, because sometimes those things get derailed.
Well, and then my main point on that one is, how about getting representation from the commissions involved in those streamlining discussions? Because we do end up sitting in the trenches with the applicants subject to those processes.
Okay. Would an example of us doing that now be the Design Review Commission's involvement in developing the design review standards and guidelines at this moment? Would
Yeah,
that
that's a
be
good example.
Okay.
But I was thinking, more broadly, there's a lot of processes that we don't get directly involved in, like the permitting process. So we approve a design, Planning Commission approves the CUP, and then off the applicant goes, the developer goes, and now they're in the city processes that we don't really.
The ministerial building permit.
Yeah,
process.
but I figure if you're re-engineering some of those administrative processes, and you think about people you might want to ask in Walnut Creek for input, I think top of that list would be some commission representation, and then also residents or citizens who actually have gone through those processes and have feedback.
So can I key in on one of the words that you used, that input? Is that, really, so input and involvement in the way that we just, discussed with the design guidelines and standards. So, that, it's pretty down in the weeds and everything. So that's the kind of thing that you're thinking about. And the reason why I'm asking about that concept specifically, it has a different level of, other than use representation too. And I think the way they talk about is input and being able to provide that really textural, deep knowledge, like has been happening with the design standards and guidelines, has been very valuable. So I just want to be clear, is that what you're talking about?
I'm not sure it's exactly the same, because you have commissioners from the Design Review Commission involved in the design review guidelines, and there's a very tight relationship, right? When you start talking about other city administrative processes related to development, that may not be our deep subject matter expert area, but just as A, people who live in the community, and B, have experience with the city and some of their processes by serving on commissions and committees, I think commission members might have good ideas or good feedback on ideas that might not be coming from either the city leadership and staff and or the consultants. And why do I say this? Because in my corporate career, you're talking about change management and re-engineering processes, and the city itself is so entrenched in its traditions and processes, just like I would be at my company, it's hard to then see outside the box. So we are much more on the periphery of a lot of the city administrative processes, but I would imagine we all care about them. At least I do. I would imagine my fellow DRC commissioners do, and probably planning and transportation, et cetera. And that way you're getting some feedback or suggestions from citizens that already are working with the city and have some understanding of how to work with the city and how the city functions, as opposed to, someone who has no connection whatsoever. But I think the people that are subject to the ministerial processes of the city are either the citizens and or their developers or new developers coming from the outside. And I think we just might have some valuable feedback or insights.
Sounds like what you're describing is kind of like I might use the wrong term, but like a stakeholder or advisor role. So it's not like you've got, like voting powers or anything, but when we do outreach for projects like a park planning project, like you have an advisory board, and it sounds like you're saying it would be nice if those of us who are involved in commissions and maybe touching other pieces of the city have an opportunity to participate in that in some fashion. I think that's a great idea. And I think that is similar to what you're touching on, because that is really similar to what we're doing with the design guidelines. But I think you're saying not necessarily the stuff we're already very obviously reasonable to be a stakeholder for, but like take advantage of our passion for the city and other projects. That's what
Yes.
I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it. And I'm imagining on design review guidelines, you have a vote at the table?
No, it's super collaborative. It's not even a voting dynamic, at least at this point where I've been involved. But it does seem like our insights are greatly valued, and it's super collaborative.
So that model, that's what I'm envisioning for all the city
Yeah.
administrative processes that applies to development.
Yeah, it does seem like, we're able to give our insights, and then they have to go do the hard stuff and figure out how to make it work, which is, in my opinion, kind of what a stakeholder or an
Yeah.
advisory board, committee, group, whatever, does.
Yeah, that's why we work for free, so we can just share our ideas.
And we thank you for that. Great. Thank you.
So I think the secretary came up with, in the end, a list of maybe 6 items. Is that too long a list? If you took how the secretary boiled it down, would that be reasonable?
Well, I'm still struggling with boiling that last item down.
The one we just discussed?
Yeah.
So if I may, so what I heard was that under the heading of streamlining city processes and systems, that as part of stakeholder engagement and involvement, that there is truly honoring and having an expectation that the stakeholder and advisory group would have all perspectives represented and in it. And so in that representative sense, like you were talking about, as opposed to having voting rights and all the rest of it. And so it's having that myriad of kaleidoscope of perspectives to be able to meld together.
I agree with what you said. But that felt very general to me, and I'm really being specific as to one aspect, which is representatives from the commissions in that capacity.
So it definitely understood and heard that. I was just trying to put it in very concise terms and so forth. And as part of the stakeholder, group or stakeholders, et cetera, our members of the commission, being able to offer your perspectives into that as part of process improvements.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so would that boil down to commission representation in developing and/or improving our process improvements? Does
Sure.
that
Yeah.
grab it?
Yeah. That grabs it for me. I don't know about my fellow commissioners. Does that grab it? Yeah.
I think it's
Something
what
like
what you were talking about.
Do we feel, the 3 of us, that we're comfortable with the list generated by the secretary?
We have 6.
I do feel comfortable. Chip, is that this is better. So the only thing when I talked about that vision of the city, that apocalyptic vision, I mean, when that's going to happen, when we develop this according to the state, it's just to just to find out exactly what the impact is going to be and that we could take some action just before it happens. So, I mean, we're going to be developing, we've been getting projects here that are not very good. I'm not going to use any other kind of words here, but they're not very good. And they're subject of approval, I mean, because they comply with everything that the state says. Is that the city that we want? And if these are the kinds of projects we're getting, how many are we getting? Where are they? And what's the kind of impact they're having on the building form, they're having on the city form, they're having on our landscape, they're having on our quality of life, our quality of housing. I would like to have a tool that will let me see that and see how we can either stop it or improve it or connect it or do something. I mean, that's the whole intent of having that tool. It's a tool. Too complicated? I guess it is.
No, it's not complicated. It is complicated. It's very complicated, actually. It's complicated and simple at the same time. I mean, there's state law, and we don't really have much of a choice. And the state law is written in a way to where, you know, we comply, and our housing element needs to comply. Most of these, not the overarching, but the base law was the HAA, which has been around for the Housing Accountability Act, which has been around for, I don't know, 10 years, if not more. It just really hasn't been used that much up until recently, when it was not buffered, but you could say buttressed by other newer state laws, such as SB 330, SB 35, which we're dealing with now. So.
If I might.
Yeah, please.
You know, I guess one of the things is that, you know, the apocalypse may not actually be upon us. And that factually, the city is already zoned to be able to accommodate the level of housing that is envisioned by the state, because that's what our housing element says. But what I've heard you say is that we could do better. We could do better in being able to show examples of what a better design might be, what a better character fit, et cetera. And it's being able to show that there are alternatives out there, and to be able to find ways to be able to do that. And, you know, essentially, that's part of the visioning process I heard that you all talking about.
Everything you said is true. I mean, that's part of it. But this is more like anticipation, like getting there before someone comes in and proposes something. We have a clear idea of, because what I see is that all these things, they don't work independently. It's not just 20 apartments here. It's 20 apartments, how they affect my neighbor, my other neighbor, my neighbor behind, the street, the city morphology, everything. So it's, yeah, I mean, a tool that will let us anticipate. I mean,
I understand that.
you know, I mean, it's just from prior experience. I mean, we had like 3 or 4 projects, or 3 projects last year that they didn't care at all about the neighborhood. They didn't care at all about the quality of the housing. They didn't care at all about the impact over the infrastructure. They were doable. I mean, they were. I mean, if you follow the state to the, I mean, if you follow the regulations, they were completely doable. And that's not what we want.
And I think what you're describing, you know, generally usually happens within the context of a general plan or general plan update, and having that vision alternative.
Yes.
And, you know, I think we could so I've heard you. How's
Yes.
that? And we'll communicate that.
How we can update our general plan to reflect those things. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so since this is a commission consideration, I don't believe we need any motions or votes, correct?
Well, have we landed on the top, do we reach consensus on what we have so far, which would be 6?
I like those that were shared.
You had a wonderful list.
Do we need to?
I like
need
the
to
list.
Tear that down at all, or are we good?
We went from 20 to 6. You did a great job.
Chip is good for that. He's good for that.
Okay, I guess, any last words on this item, Director?
On behalf of all of us here within the city infrastructure, thank you. And thank you for your thoughtful reflections, because it's important to have all different perspectives included and to be put into the mix. So a most sincere thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking us. Okay, so we will conclude. Do we have any other commission considerations, Mr. Secretary? that
We do.
Okay,
So there will be an opportunity for the chair and the vice chair to reflect these items that we discussed tonight, these considerations at the quarterly mayor-chair meeting, right? That's February 17th. I think it's 7:30 in the morning.
isn't it the 24th?
I think it's the 17th, I believe.
Only just
Friday
because
the
I was looking at my calendar, my work calendar. I thought it was
Friday the
later in the month,
17th.
but you might be right. My memory's not that good anymore.
Yeah, neither is mine. So I believe it's Friday the 7th, February 17th at typically at 7:30 a.m.
It is scheduled currently for the 17th.
I told you my memory doesn't work.
Okay. And that said, so that'll be Chair Krilling's last quarterly meeting as chair. Which brings up my next item. At our next meeting, March 1st, because our second February meeting is canceled due to lack of items, we will be re-electing, nominating and electing a new chair and vice chair. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Chair Krilling skipped his spot as vice chair, just to take into consideration. And also, we have, speaking of the chair, he turned in his 2022 parking pass, and if I could ask the other commissioners to do the same, that would be great, and I could get those to,
I don't have mine now, but I will.
at some point, yeah. And if I could get those to the city clerk. Good. That is all I got.
All right, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We'll close commission considerations. Moving on to commission member and staff reports or announcements. Do we have any announcements or reports from staff?
You just had them.
Do we have any announcements or reports from commissioners?
Nope.
Not me.
Nope.
I'll just add to what the secretary stated. I did skip my vice chair slot, and I would like to be able to serve my vice chair slot when we get to voting, if people are so inclined. I would be interested in that. It's okay if I'm not. I would then, if I did my vice chair slot, I would exit out. Somebody else would be chair, because I just did chair. So I'm just putting that out there for consideration.
Good.
And I think we are at adjournment.
Woo.
Thank you
Thank you. Am I
so
off?
much.
Thank you.